Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing another video from Grab the Lantern today. Today I wanted to talk to you guys about the Yuumi rework, which is on PBE right now. The whole change list was posted actually a little bit ago. That's why I didn't wait to try and get some actual Yuumi footage, because I just wanted to talk to you guys about this now while it's still relatively fresh. And honestly, I could not be more excited about the Yuumi rework. I think it solves a lot of the issues that the champion has and really removes some of the more frustrating aspects of the champion, like the ability for her to play the AFK Yuumi style of just sitting on her friend, pressing E off cooldown, or some of the more frustrating aspects like the prowling projectile essentially being a homing skill shot. So let's go ahead and talk through the change list. I will have Spyrax's tweets linked in the description as well if you guys want to read along with me, but suffice to say, I'm just going to be talking through them here. Yuumi's new passive is called Feline Friendship. When her attacks and spells strike champions, she heals herself for a small amount, but if she attaches to an ally within 4 seconds, they are healed as well. This is also automatically triggered if she's already attached to an ally. This effect does, however, have a cooldown on it, so you can't trigger it immediately or constantly by continually damaging champions. While attached, Yuumi gains friendship with her ally whenever they kill a champion or minion, and the ally with the most friendship is her best friend and grants her bonus effects to her abilities when she's attached to them. Now, there's a lot to unpack on this passive as far as this passive goes, but it already is a step in the right direction. First, the friendship passive addresses some of Riot's issues with Yuumi not being bound to her lane's success. We all are familiar with Yuumi losing the lane for her AD carry and then saying, I didn't care about you anyways, going top lane, attaching to the Darius, and then winning the game anyways, while her AD carry continues to suffer in silence because it doesn't matter that she lost her own lane, she can go get success elsewhere. The best friend mechanic means that for the majority of the time, Yuumi's best friend is going to be the person she lanes with. That's where you're going to be getting the vast majority of your minion kills, even if it's not necessarily where you're going to be getting a lot of champion kills, and it means that Yuumi spent so much time with her AD carry, or her bot lane carry, I guess I should say, that she's going to have the vast majority of her friendship with that particular character. Now, it does mean that Yuumi can have a change of plan later in the game. If bot lane, for example, does not do very well and she decides to go top lane anyways, she will be playing a lot of the game without her best friend bonus, but can eventually get there by just supporting her top laner and making sure that they have the assets that they need to continue to win, to get champion kills, get minion kills, etc. Certainly, I think that that is in the cards for Yuumi, which I do like as a mechanic, but I also think that this way you resolve a lot of the feels bad moments of Yuumi dying, for example, one time to the enemy bot lane and saying, screw you, and I'm going to go top lane and support that guy instead. That's a little bit harder for her to do. Generally, I'm a big fan of this. The heal as well, so you'll notice that the heal is here and not a shield, and that's because, to spoil a couple of things for you guys, the heal and the shield have swapped places. Yuumi's E now shields, and her passive now heals. This is also a big deal. It means that Yuumi can't really play that AFK strategy that she did before, because shields have to be timed. You have to see that enemy damage is incoming and press the shield before the damage lands in order for that shield to have value. Pressing a shield after the damage has already been done doesn't do anything except maybe make your partner wonder if that ability was on cooldown. Versus a heal where you can press it during a fight, after a fight, before a fight. It kind of doesn't matter as long as your partner isn't full health. You still get value off of it. And even though Yuumi's previously had a lot of mechanics that made it more relevant if you're using it in the middle of a fight, you could just use it for a heal if you wanted. Similarly to Nami being able to use Ebb and Flow as just a heal, even if there are no other champions for it to bounce to. Overall, I think these are huge changes for Yuumi that are already addressing some of the biggest pain points of the character, and I'm a big fan of them. Moving to Yuumi's Q, this is basically the same as it was before. However, there is a major change in that Yuumi can only steer the projectile for the first half of its duration, or thereabouts, before it just accelerates in a straight line. This means that if you're familiar with the timing on the projectile empowering itself, that's about how much time you have to steer the projectile. Once it becomes empowered, it just accelerates in a line, and you can no longer guide it. This means that Yuumi has to be very careful about how she sets up her projectile's approach. She can no longer guide it all the way to the enemy champion without care. Now she has to make sure that it is already set up en route to the enemy champion before it gets the acceleration. The acceleration is quite nice, so it's not like it will be as sluggish as it was before, even if you get the empowered. So as long as you can make sure that it's lined up properly, you're more likely to hit it, but generally speaking, this means that it's less of a homing projectile and just a guided projectile. You can give it some degree of guidance, but after a certain period of time, if the enemy champion has outplayed you, there's nothing more you can do to influence the projectile's trajectory. You're just going to have to accept that it's going to miss the enemy entirely. The best friend bonus on this ability is that its slow is always enhanced, and hitting an enemy champion also grants her friend bonus magic damage on hit for 5 seconds. This is a big deal. Not only does this mean that the slow percentage, which is an 80% slow at maximum rank, by the way, is always going to be valid for Yuumi, but it also gives your ally sort of 1/2 of an Ardent Sensor by giving them the bonus magic damage on hit. Again, this is a big way for allowing Yuumi to have an influence on her allies' damage. She is able to give them a damage steroid, but only if she's able to actually land her skill shot, and that skill shot is much harder to land overall, which also eliminates some of her poke-heavy playstyle that she currently has in-game. Big fan of these changes. Yuumi's W is effectively unchanged. It generally does the same thing, except that while Yuumi's on her best friend, she gains an additional 10 to 20% heal and shield power, and her ally restores health on hit. Now, this is a big deal. This is the second half of Ardent Sensor, the health restore on hit, and this is just a thing that you have as long as Yuumi is attached to you, and she gives herself bonus heal and shield power for being on her best friend. This means that her best friend is going to be turbocharged by Yuumi just being attached to them. Now, I don't think that means that Yuumi can still be AFK. There's a lot of value that she has in her kit that she still needs to press buttons for, but it does mean that she can just kind of make her ally into a stat stick by existing on them, which I think is very nice. As well, immobilizing effects on Yuumi place this ability on a 5-second cooldown. Note that this isn't just crowd control, you have to be immobilized. So Soraka Silence doesn't hose you entirely if you hop off to try and go for a poke. Instead, you have to be completely immobilized with something like a stun, a root, a snare, etc. in order for the ability to go on a cooldown. Generally speaking, then, I think that this is a very interesting change that, again, is mostly about making Yuumi want to stay on her best friend versus detaching to go to somebody else. Zoomies has been changed. I've already alluded to this. It now is a shield that you're able to grant to your ally if you're attached to somebody. And it also grants movement speed while the shield persists, which is kind of nice. It's not just a flat duration. You have to have the shield still up, so if you pop Zoomies to block damage and the damage completely removes the shield, you don't keep the movement speed bonus as well. If Yuumi is attached to an ally, it affects her ally, and it also restores mana to them, with the mana percentage increasing by up to 100% based on their missing mana. Now, doing the math real quick, Yuumi can restore up to 240 mana to her friend, assuming her friend is completely out of mana. This is a very powerful amount of mana restore to a friend, right? I've experimented with allied mana restore effects before, and they've almost all been removed from the game. So I'm a little hesitant about this specific ability. That said, it does have a 10-second cooldown at maximum rank, meaning that if you aren't overly itemizing on ability haste, it's a fairly long cooldown, and if you're using it specifically just to restore mana to somebody, you're not getting a lot of value out of the movement speed and shield most likely. Generally, I think it's fine. It does feel a little extraneous, but Riot might have had a little bit of extra power budget to buff Yuumi on, so I think this is probably fine. I've already sort of talked about the implications of this, but I like that the shield portion is now the active component that the player needs to make a decision about, versus the heal, which kind of sort of isn't really. You can know your passive's available and try to hit someone with a prowling projectile specifically to heal your friend, but generally speaking, you're not as worried about that as you are with Zoomies. Yuumi's ultimate has also gotten a couple of changes, and I don't mean to say I told you guys so, but I totally predicted this with my previous video discussing what Yuumi's rework might look like. Yuumi's ultimate no longer has a crowd control component to it, but now each wave damages enemies and heals allies, with the excess healing on allies converted to a shield. Enemies struck are slowed by a percentage, though, during a final chapter. I think this is a huge deal for the ability. It means that Yuumi really wants to be lining up as many champions in general as possible in the area of effect in order to maximize her healing and her damage at the same time. I think this makes the ability very flexible as well, being able to position it to mostly hit your friends in order to just get massive AoE heals, or trying to make sure that you get the massive slows onto enemy champions in order to really limit their ability to run away from you. There is a slow increase based on how many times they get hit, so up to a 50% slow on the last wave, assuming they got hit by every other wave. This then means that you can still combo something like a prowling projectile slow into the final chapter slow. So generally, I think this is probably a good change overall, because I do think that just the flexibility of making it more of a team fighting tool, but not hard crowd control, limits Yuumi's abilities in a way that feels true to an enchanter. Enchanters aren't known for having lots of hard crowd control. Yuumi had a very powerful hard crowd control ultimate. Now she's lost that ability. It's still very powerful, of course, but she doesn't have the ability of rooting entire teams, which I think is a good change for the champion overall. Her best friend, meanwhile, gets more healing off of this ability, and also gains bonus armor and magic resistance from this ability. This is kind of a big deal. It does mean that her individual friend is significantly harder to kill because of the heal and the bonus resist. It also means that if you're attaching to a frontliner, let's say a Juggernaut, who Yuumi previously synergized very well with, they still are getting a lot of value out of this. Bonus armor magic resistance is something that frontliners really care about, a lot more so than her AD carry, so while her AD carry might appreciate a small amount of armor magic resistance being granted presented to them and during a go moment, the frontliners are going to care about this a lot more, meaning that even though Yuumi is mostly tied to her best friend, she still has synergies if she attaches to a frontline champion or makes them her best friend in the later stages of the game. I do quite like this. Overall, I think these are really big changes for Yuumi. Again, the AFK Yuumi playstyle I think is mostly dead. At least as far as hang out on your friendly champion and press E on them off cooldown and do literally nothing else unless a team fight happens. That playstyle is sort of dead. That said, Yuumi has very few reasons to detach from her friend nowadays, which is the one disadvantage that I find with this change list. Yuumi previously would detach to try and get her pop and block because that was the way in which she accessed her shield. It was the way in which she accessed a mana restore, which helped to offset the % maximum mana cost on zoomies, which is no longer there, thankfully. But generally speaking, there were reasons for Yuumi to not be on her friend 100% of the time. This change list changes that. And I see realistically no reason for Yuumi to ever hop off of a champion entirely. Certainly can go between champions as needed to heal them or shield them or just get a better target for her ultimate. But generally speaking, Yuumi kind of doesn't need to be unattached for almost any of her abilities to actually function. And in fact, because they all are empowered, especially if she's on her best friend, they're generally even better. And so I feel like Yuumi is going to be very frustrating in that regard. The untargetable enchanter is still a thing, but I do think that because most of her outputs require her to be actually good at the champion and not just press the E key whenever it's off cooldown, I think that there's some of that frustration is alleviated because Yuumi at least has to know what she's doing and get value. There is an argument, I suppose, that could be made for Yuumi detaching to auto-attack a champion to then hop back on her friend for the heal off of her passive when prowling projectiles on cooldown, for example, or just to get more healing. But due to the long cooldown on her passive, I just don't see that being very viable. I feel like you're almost always going to have prowling projectile up instead of having to hop off to auto-attack. So in general, it feels like Yuumi is just going to stay attached to her champion at all times. Now, this is, I think, a compromise Riot made to the more casual crowd. They really like Yuumi as a beginner-friendly champion, and I think that is a very good decision for them to do, but it does mean that the beginner champion now says just attach to somebody and never unattach ever, because that's a bad decision, and that feels a little bad to me. But generally speaking, I'm a big fan of this kit. I think it addresses a lot of the issues Yuumi had, like I said previously, and I think that it gives her still enough skill expression that she won't feel like a basic champion to play. I think that good Yuumi players and great Yuumi players will still find ways to distinguish themselves from less skilled Yuumi players, which I think is a big deal. But you guys will have to let me know what you think of the change list in the comment section below, especially if you are a big Yuumi fan or a Yuumi player. Let me know desperately what you guys think of the changes. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed the video today, go ahead and leave it a like. And if you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. I upload it every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I'll talk to you all later.